After the incident with the glass door, the atmosphere in the house shifted from gentle acceptance to profound understanding. My humans knew my secret now. I carried the shadow of my past self. And in knowing, they became even quieter, their kindness more patient. The dad would sit beside me on the rug, not demanding I play with the new tennis ball, but simply resting his hand near my old shelter blanket, a constant, tactile anchor. The mom would whisper, "Good dog, Goldie," every time I ate my meal, normalizing the simple act of survival. I was finding my rhythm, a steady beat of security replacing the frantic pulse of fear. It was hidden, tucked away in the back of the closet, wrapped in silence. It smelled of Max's life, but also of a sorrow so deep it was almost sweet. I knew I shouldn't touch it, but the sound inside was an invitation. The house had become a beautiful sanctuary of routine, but also a museum of quiet reverence. The silence was still heavy, thick with the unexpressed grief for Max. It was the silence of people who were actively trying not to be sad, which is, in its own way, the loudest form of sadness. They spoke in hushed tones. Their laughter was fleeting, almost guilty. The house breathed, but it didn't sing. And I, Goldie, the new golden heart, felt the deep responsibility to bring back the melody. I noticed a specific closet in the main hallway. It was usually closed, the door always slightly ajar, a tantalizing sliver of dark wood. One afternoon, the mom left it wide open while she retrieved a rectangular cleaning device. My instinct, honed by months of scavenging for scraps, drew me to the darkness. It was a forbidden space, and forbidden spaces often hold the greatest truths. Inside, tucked beneath a pile of folded towels, was a small, dusty cardboard box. It didn't smell like Max's presence. It smelled of his essence, a concentrated odor of his long, joyful life. Sweat, dog treats, park dirt, and the specific scent of a dog who knew he was loved. My paws scratched lightly on the wooden floor as I nudged the box open. And there they were. The relics of a previous kingdom, a collection of toys, perfectly preserved. A rope covered with tiny teeth marks, a slobber-stained chew bone. And right on top, commanding attention, was a bizarre object, a bright yellow rubber duck. It was large, comical, and unsettlingly pristine compared to the other well-loved toys. The minute my nose brushed against the duck, I was hit by a double dose of Max's scent. It was a potent mix of old play and a sudden, sharp wave of melancholy. It was as if the joy was still trapped inside the rubber, but the surrounding grief was suffocating it. The other toys smelled worn out, honorably retired. The duck smelled rejected. It smelled of an emotional confusion that mirrored my own. I recoiled, instantly repelled. Touching it felt like touching a wound. I looked back at the humans. They were still busy, their backs to the hallway, but I heard the dad let out a heavy, weary sigh. The Max sigh. I realized then that this box wasn't just storage. It was the physical repository of their unresolved sorrow. And that yellow duck was the key to unlocking the past, but its repellent smell suggested a complicated, painful truth I wasn't yet ready to face. I stood motionless before the box, trembling slightly. My instinct told me to retreat, to cover the box, to respect the silence and the sorrow it contained. My survival training dictated, do not touch the painful things of others. But my Goldie heart, the one that had just been gently stitched together by acceptance, whispered, you must learn the whole story of this house, even the parts that hurt. I cautiously sniffed the other toys, the rope, the chew bone. They carried Max's happy essence, but also the dignified scent of closure. They were good memories. But the rubber duck. The bright yellow duck was different. It didn't smell like a toy that had been loved until it wore out. It smelled like a toy that had been actively disliked. It had the faint scent of Max's teeth marks, yes, but layered over that was a deep canine revulsion. It was the scent of a dog who had tolerated something, but never truly accepted it. I tried to push the duck away with my nose. It squeaked, a loud, piercing, completely ridiculous sound that echoed off the quiet walls. The sudden noise startled the humans. The mom dropped the cleaning rag. The dad straightened up instantly. They both turned, their faces a mixture of surprise and a subtle, familiar sadness, alerted by the violation of the house's sacred quiet. Their eyes landed on me, standing over the open grief box, and then on the bright yellow duck. I braced myself for the scolding, the rushed apologies they would make to Max's memory, the quick closure of the forbidden door. I was ready for the disappointment that always follows a dog who oversteps boundaries. But instead of anger, their expressions softened into something entirely unexpected. A tiny, fragile sadness that bordered on absurdity. The dad was the first to react. He walked over slowly, his eyes fixed on the duck. He didn't look sad in the way he looked when he saw the empty space on the sofa. He looked bemused, tinged with pain. He knelt by the box and gently picked up the duck. "Oh, Ducky," he murmured, the name sounding ridiculous and affectionate at the same time. He held it up to the light, and I saw a thin line of tiny, precise puncture marks near the head. Then he looked at Mom, and a flicker of recognition passed between them, a shared secret too tender to speak out loud. I watched, confused. Was this the great totem of love? Why did it smell of conflict? Dad then put the duck down and spoke, not to me, but to the object, yet his voice was loud enough for me to hear. "You never did like that duck, did you, buddy? Not even a little bit." The mom let out a small sound, not a cry, but an involuntary exhale that sounded choked with both pain and stifled amusement. She took a step closer, wiping her face across her face, her voice catching. "He would tolerate it for maybe 30 seconds if you put peanut butter on it, but then he'd bury it under the entire contents of the toy basket." The puzzle pieces began to shift in my golden brain. Max hadn't loved this duck. Max hated this duck. It was the anti-joy toy, and the humans had kept it, not as a treasured relic of their love, but as a monument to Max's singular, inexplicable disgust. They kept it because Max's hatred of a silly yellow duck was a specific, funny, and deeply personal part of his character. It was an imperfection they adored. The realization hit me with the force of a soft paw tap. Grief isn't just about remembering perfection. It's about treasuring the absurd, flawed details. They didn't love Max despite his quirks. They loved him because of them. And in keeping this rejected toy, they were preserving a piece of his hilarious, stubborn soul. This toy, which repelled me with the scent of Max's aversion, was in fact the greatest possible invitation for me to be myself. They had shown me that I didn't have to be perfect. I could be odd. I could be fearful. I could even dislike a yellow duck, and I would still be loved. I looked from the duck to the humans. The mom's face, usually set in that gentle, careful sadness, began to twitch. The dad, holding the despised object, let out a small, quiet, almost painful chuckle. It was rusty, unused, and cut short, as if he immediately regretted the sound of joy. But it was real. It was a memory breaking through the heavy curtain of sorrow. I realized my mission wasn't to replace Max's memory, but to prove that the house's capacity for joy was not buried with him, and the path to that joy lay not in reverence, but in absurdity.
I looked at the duck again. It was my chance. I had to embrace the spirit of Max's humorous rejection. I had to do something that was purely me, but that played on their memory of him. I moved decisively. I didn't grab the duck gently like a treasured heirloom. I snatched it, not to chew, but to shake. With a quick, violent snap of my head, a movement born of my old defensive instincts, now channeled into theatrical play, I seized the yellow duck and gave it a furious whole-body shake. The duck let out a continuous, high-pitched, ridiculous squeak, squeak, squeak that broke the solemn silence of the house like a hammer to glass. The sound was utterly inappropriate. It was loud, demanding, and utterly, wonderfully stupid. And then it happened. The sound I had been waiting for. The mom, who had been wiping her eyes a moment ago, threw her head back and let out a huge, unrestrained laugh. It was a full-bodied, glorious sound that echoed through the house, shaking the dust from the heavy silence. It wasn't sad. It wasn't forced. It was pure, explosive, unexpected amusement. The dad was close behind. He laughed so hard he bent over, slapping his knee and murmuring, "Oh, Goldie, you little menace, you hate it too." I continued my performance. I didn't just shake it. I tossed it into the air, caught it with a clumsy stumble, and then trotted away with it, holding the duck delicately by the tip of its ridiculous head, my tail wagging tentatively at the edges of my golden coat. I was not playing with the duck. I was performing a theatrical interpretation of Max's disdain for the duck. I brought it back and dropped the squeaking, offensive object directly at the dad's feet, then retreated a step, my head bowed in mock triumph and a tiny, tentative hope. The humans were still laughing, but now their laughter was different. It wasn't the bittersweet chuckle of memory. It was the joyful, relieved sound of new connection. It was the sound of the house coming back to life. They were laughing with me in the present, using a forgotten piece of the past. The knot of grief that had been tightening around the family's heart since Max left finally loosened, broken by the high-pitched shriek of a despised rubber toy and the enthusiastic chaos of a rescued dog. The laughter lasted for a glorious long minute. It was the longest, purest sound of joy I had heard in the house, a vital affirmation that my presence was not just tolerated, but celebrated. When the laughter finally subsided, it didn't leave behind the heavy silence. It left a lightness, a gentle hum of residual happiness that lingered in the air, a scent far sweeter than any food or soap. The air felt cleaner, the sunlight brighter. The mom wiped a tear of laughter from her eye and knelt down, her face radiant. She was looking at me now, not with the deep, sad recognition of shared loss, but with pure, unadulterated delight. "That's it, Goldie," she breathed, her voice filled with a warmth I hadn't heard before. "That's exactly it. You're perfect." She didn't mean my skill at fetching or my obedience. She meant my ability to be genuinely, imperfectly me. The dad picked up the squeaking duck again. He didn't put it back in the closet. He tossed it lightly, not for me to chase, but as a playful offering to the air. "I knew we kept that duck for a reason," he chuckled, his voice still a little shaky, but now strong with renewed emotion. "You're reminding us how to be silly." I realized then the profound complexity of the human heart. They needed the memory of Max's specific, cherished stubbornness, his hatred of the duck, to allow themselves to be vulnerable to new, specific joy, my performance of that same hatred. I hadn't disrespected Max's legacy, I had activated it. I had proven that love doesn't end, it seeks new channels for expression. Max's greatest gift to them wasn't his loyalty, but the permission he gave them to be wholeheartedly, sometimes ridiculously, attached. And now that permission had been transferred to me. For the first time since my adoption, I didn't just feel safe, I felt necessary. The dad did something else that solidified the change. He walked over to the new tennis ball, the one that had sat untouched on the rug. He nudged it towards me. This time, there was no hesitation. The anxiety about Max's territory had been broken by the silly, high-pitched shriek of a rubber duck. I gave the new ball a happy, solid whack with my nose, sending it skittering across the smooth floor. The dad clapped once, a sharp, happy noise, and the mom let out a cheer. It was an instant, spontaneous celebration of normalcy. I was finally allowed to bring Max's old tradition, joyful play, into my new routine. My heart swelled with a feeling of deep belonging. I thought back to the darkness of the shelter, where the only thing you fought for was survival. Here I was fighting, or rather playing, for a shared happiness. If you have ever needed a simple moment of pure joy to break through a time of sadness, and if Goldie's power to heal her humans inspires you, please make this a moment of connection. Subscribe to Tales of a Golden Heart right now. Every subscriber helps Goldie spread more light and encourages my humans to share more of their beautiful, complicated life. Share this video with anyone who needs a moment of silly, unreserved laughter today.
The memory of that loud, honest laughter became the new baseline of the house. It superseded the heavy silence, the anxious whispers, and the ghost of the snarling reflection. It was the sound of true release, and I, Goldie, was its inadvertent conductor. The yellow rubber duck, the despised object of Max's life, was elevated to the status of an heirloom, a peculiar artifact of affection. They didn't put it back in the closet. Instead, the mom placed it on the mantelpiece, next to a framed photo of a younger Max, as if recognizing the silly duck's essential role in their shared history. It stood there, a bright yellow monument to Max's perfect imperfection. This was the human way of assigning meaning, transforming a source of conflict into a symbol of continuity, using a small, ridiculous object to bridge the chasm between sorrow and hope. My own behavior relaxed dramatically. The need to be constantly vigilant, to prove my worthiness with silence and submission, evaporated. I began to exhibit the true nature of a golden heart: boundless, sometimes clumsy, joy. I chased the new tennis ball with abandon, allowing my clumsy paws to tangle and my body to flop onto the rug in exhaustion. I wasn't performing the perfect dog for them. I was simply being. The fear that I was a temporary guest, liable to be sent back to the cold concrete, finally receded, replaced by the profound, comforting weight of certainty. I was permanent. I watched the humans, too, shed their inhibitions. The dad started whistling in the morning, a cheerful, slightly off-key tune that was 100 times better than the heavy sigh. The mom began to leave her book on the couch when I approached, choosing 15 minutes of chest rubs and soft conversation over the comfort of her routine. These small, daily ruptures and their carefully controlled grief were my truest measures of success. They were giving themselves permission to love deeply again, precisely because I had reminded them that loving is also about playing. I saw the complex, beautiful mechanism of human resilience. They use routine to survive the loss, but they use chaos and laughter to truly live again. The simple sound of my messy, galloping paws was replacing the controlled tiptoe of their morning. But there was a deeper layer to this lesson. I realized that my own fear of being replaced was mirrored by their fear of forgetting. They held on to the grief for Max not because they were morbid, but because they feared that if the sorrow left, Max's presence would leave with it. My encounter with the duck and the ensuing laughter shattered that false binary. It proved that joy doesn't erase memory, it honors it. It demonstrated that the best way to keep Max alive was not through quiet contemplation, but through the loud, messy, unpredictable happiness of life that he himself had taught them to value. The duck was proof that Max's spirit was robust enough to endure even a joke, and that was the greatest comfort I could offer. The memory of his specific, amusing aversion became the catalyst for my specific, healing affection. I began to participate in their rituals,
not just observing them. When the dad settled into his armchair, I would instinctively bring him a toy. Not the new ball, but usually the old rope that Max had loved, as a silent acknowledgement of his legacy, a nod to the past. The dad would briefly hold it, a flicker of pain crossing his eyes, but then he would toss it for me with a genuine smile. I understood that grief was not a wall to climb over. It was a companion that had to be patiently carried. And carrying it became easier when we could share a laugh over a ridiculous rubber bird.
Max's enduring loyalty had carved a deep channel for love in this house, and my abandonment had taught me the desperate value of filling that channel. Our two broken stories, the loss of a fulfilled life and the fear of an unfulfilled one, had converged at the intersection of a ridiculous yellow duck and a moment of genuine laughter. I was not there to close the chapter on Max. I was there to help them turn the page and continue the book of golden love. The mom even started calling the moment the Great Duck Liberation, a playful name that acknowledged the emotional weight of that squeak. It was a shared inside joke, a secret language built on Max's disdain and my deliverance. The stability I now felt was breathtaking. I had the warm, clean rug, the predictable meals, and the ultimate safety, the human's hands that only offered healing, never harm. I realized that my early anxiety, the fear that I had to fight the shadow in the glass, was the last desperate act of the shelter dog. That dog needed to prove her worth. This dog, the one lying here, knew her worth was inherent simply because they chose to love her, messy past and all. I was the recipient of an inheritance more valuable than any treasure in the closet. I inherited their capacity for unconditional, ridiculous, life-affirming love. The ultimate lesson that I, Goldie, learned on the day I confronted the forbidden box was this. The deepest form of healing is the courage to rediscover joy in the wake of loss. Sorrow can be a loyal companion, but it should never be the only guest in your home. You must be brave enough to welcome the absurd, the silly, and the imperfect, because these are the true relics of a well-lived life. Never let the fear of what you lost prevent you from fully embodying the happiness that remains. The best way to respect a beautiful past is to live a brilliant present. By keeping that silly duck, the humans kept a thread of absurdity, a vital truth that showed me that I was free to be my imperfect, sometimes fearful, but always loyal, golden self. My golden heart was finally, truly singing. If this story has reminded you that laughter is the strongest medicine and that your own imperfections are often your greatest gifts, please don't let this moment of light pass you by. Give this video your most heartfelt like. It's the sound of the laughter that healed the house. And leave a comment below telling us, what golden lesson did you learn from confronting your reflection today? And most importantly, subscribe to Tales of a Golden Heart right now and ring that notification bell, because the next chapters in Goldie's life timeline will prove that the joy we find after loss is the joy that truly lasts. We are a family of survivors, and our story is just beginning.